How's it everyone? Welcome back to another string review right here on OpenCourt. I'm Kent and today I'm testing out a string by the company Tecnifibre. It's a non-poly string. It's been a while since I've reviewed a non-poly string on this channel. This string is probably my favorite non-poly string that I've ever tried, excluding natural gut of course. And that string is the Tecnifibre Triax. Let's check it out. So Tecnifibre's string line, they're known for making some of the most arm-friendly and comfortable multi-filament strings out there. One of their most famous ones is the biphase. That's the string that I used all throughout high school. I strung it in my liquid metal Radical 1820 at 60 pounds. That might seem really tight, but Tecnifibre biphase is a really soft string. 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐷 is another popular one. Those are both ranked up there with natural gut in terms of comfort. I've gotten better since then and I've switched pretty much exclusively to poly. This Triax string is what they call their multi-filament poly fusion. Tecnifibre has a few of these fusion technology strings. I think this is probably the best. It's certainly the most expensive at around $20 a set. And I think they also had like the HDMX. They also had the Tecnifibre Duramix HD. That was a string I used to use when I was in Japan. The RPX and the TGV I also believe are poly multi-fusions, but I think the Triax is their flagship. It's undoubtedly, in my opinion, the best one. This is my favorite non-poly, non-natural gut string out there. But I mean, it's technically poly. It's half poly. If you can see on the back of the package here, it says 50% polyamide fibers and 50% thermal polyester. So it is 50-50 polyester and nylon multi-filament. You can see in the picture here, it's woven kind of together into one strand of strings. This is their polyfusion technology. So because it has polyester fibers woven in with the nylon polyamide fibers, it does play stiffer than something like a biphase, which is just 100% multi-filament. This is the reason I prefer Triax over a full bed of biphase or any other type of nylon string, because it gives me that firmer feel for a little bit more control when I'm hitting aggressive baseline ground strokes and returns. I don't really get that anymore with the biphase. I've kind of outgrown it, but this Triax is the only multi-filament string that I feel comfortable playing in a full bed because of that firmer feel. And it also has a special type of coating called the SPO coating, anti-abrasion, so it slides and snaps back much better than a traditional multi-filament. That's one issue I have, because all the strings move to one side and they get stuck there, and when I hit another ball against that same angle, the strings don't have any more room to slide, and that's what causes the ball to fly up at a really high launch because it's not snapping back and getting spin. The Triax gets much better spin potential than some of those traditional 100% polyamide fiber multi-filament strings. This string comes in 3 gauges. We got the 128, 133, and 138 millimeters. So if you're a frequent string breaker, you can go with the 138, although I'm going with the 128. I prefer something a little bit thinner, but with something as soft like multi-filament, I am willing to go a little bit thicker for a little bit more durability. But this Triax string, I've played it a few years ago and I loved it. And one of the things about this is that it doesn't come to unravel like a biphase or any of those other multi-filaments as much. So it maintains its durability and it doesn't become unraveled, which causes playability to drop. However, because it does still have those polyamide fibers, this is a very comfortable and very powerful string compared to a full bed of polyester. All right, so I got the Tecnifibre Triax strung up in my Speed Pro Legend, the Djokovic edition one. This is an 1820 pattern and I got it strung at 54 pounds. Usually this 1820 I string at 52 if I'm using a full bed of poly, but because the Triax is a bit softer, I strung it in a full bed of 54 pounds. It has been a while since I've used this string, but this is arguably my favorite non-poly string out there besides gut, and I'm excited to finally try it again and see if it holds up. I've tried a few multi-filaments since the last time I tried this, so I want to see if this is indeed still my favorite non-poly, non-natural gut string. So without further ado, let's get out on the court and let's test out the Tecnifibre Triax. But before that, if you guys like this content and want to see more, be sure to overhead smash that like and subscribe button to keep the reviews coming. So let's start with the pros of the Tecnifibre Triax. This string does many things well that most nylon multi-filament strings cannot replicate, and that is the reason why this is my favorite non-poly string besides natural gut. My favorite aspect of the Triax is the level of control and consistency it gets compared to traditional multi-filaments. One of the issues I have with multis is that the strings get stuck out of place easily, which leads to erratic launch angles off the string bed. That is why multis are typically made for players with slower swing speeds, where the contact won't move the strings much and the slower swing won't send the ball off in such inconsistent angles. The Triax is the best multi that I've tried at keeping the strings consistently snapping back, and this leads to more consistency in the trajectory on my aggressive swings. This allows me to play my aggressive baseline game confidently, and it is similar to polys in that area. But something the Triax does much better than even some of my favorite polys is giving me a lot of power on all of my shots. This goes without saying, but the Triax is a lot more comfortable than all of the stiff polys that I like, and because of that comfort, it provides a ton of pocketing and power. Granted, the Triax is a bit stiffer than traditional multis, but it is still very soft, so if you're worried about your arm but don't want to use a full poly, the Triax could be what you are looking for. One of the weakest parts of my game is the flat serve because of my shorter reach, but the Triax gave me a much needed boost in power that allowed my flat serve to clear the net at a higher rate than usual and also gave my opponents fits when it went in. My slice flat hybrid serve also worked well, and I found myself using that serve quite often on my second serve, mostly because the slice flat worked better with this string than my kick serve. I also really appreciated the easy power on my ground strokes, especially my backhand. Because I hit a bit flat, I never had an issue with the launch angle and I could penetrate deep into my opponent's court with my backhand. I also didn't need to swing very hard to get a deep return into the corners. I actually had to consciously tell myself not to swing so fast on my returns because if I swung at my normal return speed, I would send the ball past the baseline. But this also meant I could slow down my swing and prioritize good contact to reduce mishits, but more importantly, I could focus on the angle of my racket face, and that meant I could change direction on my return easier than usual. I usually don't like to aim for the down the line return because it is a low percentage shot, but the Triax gave me the confidence to attempt it more often. I also had a lot of power and feel on my volleys. I typically like stiffer strings from the baseline because of the control, but I actually prefer softer strings at net because I don't have to swing that hard and I can still get decent power. A soft string like the Triax reacts well on off-center hits, and I can get that defensive volley deep to keep my opponent at the baseline. Also, when poaching, a softer string will give me more forgiveness to put the ball away because it makes the sweet spot slightly bigger with more power. Same thing with transition volleys. When I'm serving and volleying, that first transition volley is one of the hardest shots in tennis in my opinion, and the Triax gives me good launch to pin my opponent deep without me having to swing through as much as a poly. But one thing the Triax does well compared to other multis is the feel and touch. Multis like Biphase and NRG² tend to be a bit on the muted side because of all the fibers tend to drown out the vibrations. This is good for comfort, but not as much for crisp feeling. However, because of the poly fibers woven into the construction, the Triax has a slightly stiffer feel which sends more vibrations up my arm, and that allows me to hit drop shots and angle volleys with precision, and I never really had an issue with height and depth control with my drop shots. Playing defense with the Triax was also rather easy because of the forgiving feel and large sweet spot. When I had to hit an outstretched ground stroke, I didn't have to be as precise as with the poly because even if I hit off center, the Triax provided a decent boost of power to keep the ball deep. Defensive lobs were also fairly easy, and the crisper feel allowed me to control the depth of the lob better than more muted strings. So overall, I still love the Triax string because it plays more like a poly than any other multi-filament string. I like that it also holds tension and playability better than soft polys as well because I don't have the steep drop off in control. There is, however, one issue that I can't really get over. So now let's get into the cons of the Tecnifibre Triax. I will say that the only real con for me is the lack of spin potential when compared to poly strings. The Triax provides and maintains spin potential much better than most other multis, but it obviously comes up short when compared to polys because it lacks the sharp snapback that poly strings are known for. This really hurts my kick serve. I had a difficult time using my kick serve in an offensive manner. Usually I like to use the kick serve out wide on the ad side to pull my opponent off the court. That opens up the opposite side for me to approach the net and volley into. However, I struggled to hit a kick serve that would curve sharply in the air and bounce out of my opponent's strike zones, and I couldn't approach the net confidently with my kick serve. I also used the kick serve about 80% of the time on my second serve, so I knew I would most likely be starting the point on defense if I missed my first serve. Thankfully, this string is easy to play defense with. The slice and flat serves were also working well, so this wasn't a huge issue, but it still was an adjustment for me because the kick serve is my most reliable serve. Also, the lack of a quick snapback off the string bed resulted in a bit of a higher launch angle than I'm used to. This might not bother most people who have a slower swing or like to hit high over the net to push opponents deep, but for me, I need a string that gives me a low trajectory because I usually step inside the baseline to hit returns or attack ground strokes to get up to the net. The lower spin potential and high launch meant I hit a few ground strokes past the baseline that I otherwise wouldn't have if I was using a poly. Besides the lack of spin potential when compared to polys, I don't really have any issues with this string. It is a bit on the expensive side, but it's around the same price as biphase and it is far more durable. Biphase and other multis start to unravel and this leads to a drop in playability and even less spin. Triax takes much longer to unravel, so I do believe it is worth the price. If I were to use the Triax again, I would put it into a more open pattern racket to get more spin, but bump up the tension so it doesn't become too uncontrollable. So, who is the Tecnifibre Triax string for? There are a number of different types of players this string is suited for. For players who break multi too easily and want a more durable option that isn't poly. For soft poly players who want the power and comfort without the sudden loss in tension soft polys typically come with. For players who have been using multi all their life and want to make the slow transition into poly, or for players who like to use hybrids and want something a little firmer and more durable to pair with a poly. This is a very versatile string. However, if you are an advanced player with a very aggressive playstyle and rely on heavy spin and powerful ground strokes, the Triax can't match the control and spin of a poly. To conclude this review, I definitely still think this is the best non-poly, non-natural gut string I've tried. My opinion from a few years ago still holds true, and if you haven't tried the Triax, I suggest giving it a try if you fit any of the player types I mentioned earlier. So now let me hear from you guys in the comments. Have you tried the Triax or any of Tecnifibre's other fusion strings? What did you think of them? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next review. Thank you for watching this review of the Tecnifibre Triax string right here on OpenCourt. If you guys like this content, be sure to overhead smash that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you on an OpenCourt.